Chapter 5 of Tractate Shabbos largely discusses the laws of animals on Shabbos, particularly things like your animal going in and out of public domains, what it can be wearing while it does that, concerns about objects it's wearing that could fall off and cause it to carry in the public domain, and similar. So let's get into the first Mishnah. A camel can go out wearing a halter, and a female dromedary, as will be explained, a white one, which is harder to control, can wear an iron nose ring. A donkey from Luv can wear an iron bit, a horse can wear a collar, and any animal that normally wears a collar can go out on Shabbos with a collar and be pulled by it. A side point about purification: you don't need to remove the collar from an animal while purifying it with ash water or immersion. The Gemara lists a lot of the definitions of animals and gear listed above. Also, a female dromedary with a halter is not allowed. It's considered a burden, and there's argument if a nose ring on a camel serves as an excess burden and is thereby not allowed. There's debate about a cat, and it's ruled that a rope collar on a cat is an excessive restraint, but an excessive restraint is not considered a burden. There's a story brought which proves this. Okay, regarding a goat, it says you're allowed to go out with it on Shabbos with a halter attached through holes carved in its horns. There's an unresolved question about a halter in the goat's beard. It also brings up later about a cow with a strap between its horns. It's not allowed if it's for decoration, and there's a disagreement based on whether it's allowed for controlling the animal. There is the other opinion that an excessive restraint is actually classified as a burden. We try to bring a disproof from the fact that it's allowed to put the para aduma, the red heifer, on a leash, but that could be unique either because the cow is being led from city to city, because it's expensive, or because it could be a particularly rebellious cow. Going out or being pulled by a leash, according to one, means either having the leash wrapped around the neck or being pulled on, and according to the other, it means only going out pulling the leash. There is a lot of support for the first opinion, which are discussed. Also, normally animal collars can't even become impure at all. However, the case we mentioned at the end of immersing the animal from impurity is either applicable because it's a human adornment of some sort that's being repurposed on an animal, or, as you're now pulling on the collar, it's now considered a human utensil. Also, the immersing doesn't have an interpolation between the water because the collar here is hammered out, so it could get totally and properly immersed. This would actually cause further issue with the discussion on the reason why this collar needs immersing, as technically by hammering out the collar, it should reset the vessel from any impurity, but maybe not, as it could not apply by a constructive change. Or perhaps there's no issue at all and we're just dealing with a really wide collar. There's also discussion on if there's a difference by the type of ring, and by extension, different types of needles, whether or not they have the laws of impurity apply to them. New Mishnah. A donkey can go out with a saddlecloth if it's tied on. Rams can go out attached. Ewes can go out while held, tied, or fastened. We're going to explain these cases soon, what they exactly mean. Goats can go out with their udders tied. Rabbi Yossi doesn't allow any of these, besides that ewes can go out fastened. Rabbi Yehuda holds that goats can be brought out with their udders tied only if it's to dry their milk, not to milk them. The Gemara has an opinion which states that this is where the saddlecloth was tied to the donkey before Shabbos, and there's a few supports for this. There's an argument if a saddle is allowed, based on if a feed bag is allowed. The issue with a saddle is either that it could fall off, or that it's only to cool the donkey, which isn't really necessary for the donkey's well-being, unlike the saddlecloth, which is necessary to warm up the donkey, and is definitely necessary to alleviate its suffering. We try to bring some cases to disprove this. There's also an argument if you can bring an amulet on an animal. Okay, we just said that you can do something to an animal to alleviate its suffering. We try to bring some cases which imply otherwise, but they are explained to not apply because in each case the action doesn't help the animal in this manner. The goats may only go out with their pouch on their udders if it's secured properly, according to some, or according to others, the above point only if it's to dry up the milk. It also mentions some unique goats that had particularly large udders and needed pouches so they wouldn't get damaged. Okay, a bit of an odd story. There was a husband whose wife passed, leaving a nursing child, and he couldn't afford a wet nurse, so a miracle happened and he became able to nurse his child. Some say this is because he was a very great man and deserved a miracle. Some say he was not, as he required a miracle, as opposed to the normal means of a livelihood. Normally, miracles don't happen by creating food. Another story, there was this lady who had her arm cut off, and the husband didn't notice until she had passed. Some say this was due to the modesty of the wife, some say it was due to the modesty of the husband. The point on goats was that they can go out tied together in pairs. Some say what it refers to is actually leather tied over their hearts so wolves don't eat them, specifically male sheep which walk in a manner which can antagonize wolves. Alternatively, it refers to a leather blocker to prevent mating. The point on ewes being tied was a similar tying to prevent mating, based on some verses. Them being fastened meant putting leather sheets around the wool to protect their cleanliness. There are many opinions as to who to follow by the goats argument. Okay, new Mishnah. What can't animals go out with? A camel can't go out with a saddlecloth, it can't go out bound or hobbled, and this applies to all animals. You can't pull a train of camels tied to each other, but you can hold each camel's rope individually, as long as you don't wrap them around your hand. The Gemara says you can tie the saddlecloth to the placenta. It also defines binding and hobbling. No tying the camels in a train, as it looks like you're taking them to be sold in a market. The point about pulling all the camels at once, some say it has nothing to do with Shabbos, rather it's a law about forbidden mixtures of the ropes. Furthermore, the rope shouldn't hang out of your hand more than a handbreadth or two, and the rope in between him and the animal must be a handbreadth above the ground, so it looks like you're actually leading the animal. New Mishnah. A donkey can't go out with a saddlecloth if it's not tied on, or with a bell, even if it's stopped up. It can't go out with a ladder on its neck, which will be explained, or a strap on its leg. Chickens cannot go out with cords or leg straps. Rams cannot go out with a tail wagon, which was this little wagon used to carry the tail so it wouldn't get damaged. There's a thing about ewes and calves, which will be explained. A cow cannot go out with hedgehog skin on its udders to prevent rodents from taking its milk, or with a strap on its horns. One sage's cow did go out with a strap on its horns, but the sages didn't allow it. The Gemara says donkeys can't go out with a saddlecloth, as explained earlier. It's only allowed if tied on before Shabbos, in regards to keeping the animal warm. The bell is an issue because it looks like you're taking it out to market. The ladder we mentioned was a cheek brace, so it can't scratch itself. The strap is also so it can't hurt itself by kicking its own legs. The cords on chickens were as identifying marks. The strap was so it couldn't break stuff as it walked. The ewe thing mentioned is either oil warmer or a parasite remover. The calf thing was a small yoke. The strap thing on the cow is basically the same argument as before. If it's for decoration, no. If it's for controlling the animal, then it's an argument. Last thing we said was that there was this one sage who had a cow that he had acting against the law of the sages, and it explains that it was actually his neighbor's cow, but since he didn't protest against her, it was called his cow. Some teachings in that regard: if you can protest against others, your household, your town, or the world, and you don't, you're punished for the wrongdoing. The examples of being able to protest against the world, for instance, are the Reish Gilusa and similar leaders of the Jewish people. There's a story brought about sages transferring the judgment to the head of the rabbinical court. Another teaching: God never issues a good decree and retracts it for not good, besides for if you fail to rebuke. There's a verse that's explained that God told the angel Gabriel to mark the righteous' foreheads with ink to be spared and the wicked's foreheads with blood for destruction, but the righteous didn't rebuke. And the rebukes wouldn't have worked, but they didn't know that. The angels of destruction listed were Fury, Anger, Wrath, Destroyer, Breaker, and Annihilator. The people were marked with the Hebrew letter Tuf, referencing either that you, which is tough, shall live or die from that letter, or it references the merit of the patriarchs, or it's the last letter of God's seal, MS, Truth. Or it's that they learned the entire Torah from the first letter Aleph to the last letter Tuf. Some say the merit of the patriarchs lasted until the time of the prophet Hosea or the prophet Eliyahu Hanavi. Another point: there is no death without transgression, and there is no suffering without sin. All of this is based on verses. But there were 4 people who died without any sin: Binyamin, Amram, Moshe's father, Yishai, King David's father, and Kilov, King David's son. So that's a refutation of the point. Okay, one of the 12 sons of Yaakov, Reuven, it says he lay with Bilhah, the concubine of his mother. But that's not literal based on another verse, rather it means that he moved his father's bed, so it's considered as if he did this transgression. This was either as he thought it was unfair that Bilhah, the concubine, was rivaling his mother, or that he mixed up the bed of his father and of the divine presence. There are similar points about Eli the Kohen Gadol and Pinchas, who didn't protest against Chafni. A similar point on the sons of Shmuel and King David, that they never actually sinned, as by Bathsheba, people who went to war then wrote bills of divorce before fighting, and Uriah was considered a rebel against the monarchy, so he was killed. But perhaps King David did sin, as he accepted a slanderous report about Mephibosheth, so it's a difficulty. It also says that if not for accepting the slanderous report, the house of David wouldn't have been split, idol worship wouldn't have been a thing, and there would have been no exile. Also, King Shlomo never sinned with idol worship, although it says he did. It means he didn't protest against his wives, who did. So it's considered as if he did the idol worship. For instance, it says he married the Pharaoh's daughter, and she showed him 1,000 musical instruments and explained how they were used for idolatry, and he didn't protest. It's also taught that at the moment King Shlomo married the Pharaoh's daughter, the angel Gabriel stuck a reed pole into the ocean, a sandbank formed around it, and it eventually became Rome. A similar thing happened when King Yerovam made his idolatry. A hut was built, which eventually became Italia of Greece. Another person who didn't actually sin was Yoshiyahu, who was the greatest penitent of his generation. The greatest penitents of this generation, it says, are either the sages, the brothers Abba and Acha, Or Ukavana, son of Nehemiah. An individual dozed off in a lecture once, then he had a dream where he saw an angel reach out his hand to accept the sage's repentance. And that's the end of chapter 5.